Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It's part 2 of the December Q&A, which
where we ask questions. No, they
ask questions that we answer, and the one that you proudly proclaimed last time was the last Q&A of the decade.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
big deal.
Yep.
Big deal.
Some people criticize us for, getting the decade wrong. There's a whole, is 2019 or 2020 the end of the decade discussion, but we don't care. We're calling this the end of the decade just for this purpose. So yeah,
that's it.
That's it. We've solved the debate just like that. Easy. So yeah, let's just get into the questions, I guess. How does Radeon Vega's HBM2 compare to memory that uses separate modules like the rather new GDDR6? And could we see a comeback of an HBM-style memory in the future? I think purely just based on the technical stuff, HBM still has higher memory bandwidth than GDDR6.
Yep.
And a lot of that advantage comes from how close it's positioned to the die. So you can make the interconnect
much
shorter
wider.
and wider, and that gives you a lot of advantages. But on the downsides being it's more expensive to produce, you're limited in the sort of memory configurations you can have with HBM.
It's definitely a premium graphics card product. And the problem was AMD didn't have sort of a flagship, at least one that could rival NVIDIA, flagship class GPU to pair HBM memory with. So they were sticking it on what was really mid-range GPUs with Vega 56 and 64, and you don't really get the benefit there, and they can't charge the premiums that they would have needed to justify using that memory. But even something like the RX 5700 XT, if that had HBM memory, it would be noticeably faster. It'd be quite a bit quicker because that card, or that GPU in particular, seems like it is memory limited. But it's not a mid-range, as Tim said, because of the cost to implement it. It's not a mid-range to low-end solution. So until AMD have some whopping great GPU that can compete with NVIDIA's best, it's probably not going to make sense to use HBM memory.
Yeah, I think that it will. It's not a dead technology. I think that we will still see these sort of large memory caches very close to the dies in future products. It's just a matter of, as you say, when it makes sense.
Yeah. So yeah, basically, in short though, how does it compare? It's closer to the die, wider memory bus, much more bandwidth. So
why are there no reviews of KFA2/Galax, EVGA, BenQ, and ISO? I'm never sure how to pronounce that brand. ISO. I'm not sure.
They make monitors?
They do.
Okay, cool.
I think this just comes down to the general stuff like availability, which companies are willing to send products out. And we review so many products that it's like our plate's already full to sort of, we tend to work with companies that want to send us stuff. And
well, the companies given here an example. So Galax they're one and the same, those two companies. We've done some Galax product reviews in the past. Products have been pretty good. Not a huge demand from the viewers to cover their stuff, so we sort of only have done it when it's been convenient. EVGA pretty much don't. Do they? I've seen some EVGA stuff for sale in Australia.
Yeah, they're not nearly as big of a brand as they are in the US.
So they're not really. Yeah, they don't really sell much in Australia, and then because Tim and I are Australian, these companies think that our audience is all Australian, where in reality about 4% of you watching this video will be Australian. About 30-something% will be from the US, so we have a pretty big US viewership, but these companies don't recognize that, so EVGA won't send us any samples, so their loss, I suppose. But yeah, we would like to check out their products.
It's the same with like BenQ. I mean, we've tested BenQ products in the past. It's just about, when they've got interesting new products to test. And as far as, the ISO products, because they're more of a sort of professional monitor category, we're sort of more focusing at this point on gaming products because those monitor reviews have done a lot better. So maybe in the future, if monitors become like a really big thing and we can get massive views on all of our monitor reviews, then we'd start testing some of those premium professional products like you get from that brand. But for now, probably not something that we're going to be focusing on too much.
Thoughts on 12nm first gen Ryzen? We talked about this briefly on our live stream. It's not something I've really looked into, but it doesn't on the surface make that much sense to Tim and I. We're not sure why they're doing that, why they haven't just reserved the 12nm supply for second gen Ryzen. So not sure why sort of breathe more life into first gen, why that would make sense. There's obviously a reason. It obviously makes sense to do it. We're just not quite sure why. So
yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how that product compares from a performance perspective, because it's still using, it's not being upgraded to Zen Plus. It's still should be a Zen product.
Yep.
I mean, even that, is it unclear whether it is just a rebranded Zen Plus product?
I haven't really looked into it at all. I don't find it particularly interesting, to be honest. We have 12 nanometer second gen Ryzen parts selling dirt cheap, like $100 to $120 US for a 2600, and like $150 for a 2700. I don't know why you'd want to revive first gen parts when you've got the second gen parts for those prices.
Has your enthusiasm for discussing/reviewing PC hardware been mitigated due to the grueling content requirements of maintaining a YouTube channel? No, I think if anything, it sort of enhanced it in a sort of way, because we get to test a lot more stuff than we've ever been able to test as a sort of just a general consumer. So if anything, it makes it better and more exciting to have a better access to all this stuff. And the content schedule isn't that bad. We do work hard, but I don't think that really...
I work hard.
No. Yeah. I do slack off compared to you. You go crazy.
No, that's a good point. I agree with that. I think for me, I hope this doesn't sound sort of cliche or lame or anything, but for me, if when we release the video, you guys, the viewers, our subscribers, really enjoy that video and we get some really great feedback from it or whatever, that for me makes all the effort we put into that video worth it, and other videos. So yeah, I really enjoy it when the viewers enjoy the content, basically. So it's been one example was that, I can't remember what I named it, the ultimate scaling video, the one where I picked, I think, 3 CPUs, tested them about 4 games with 3 different presets, with about 4 different graphics cards. I don't even know. I guess I was just interested to see what the results would be like. I spent about over a week just benchmarking, and then when I was putting it together, I thought, wow, this is like kind of it's almost a blue bar graph overload. Like, I don't really know if anyone's going to really enjoy this video, but I've come this far, might as well finish it. And then it was like really well received. I couldn't actually get over how much you guys enjoyed that video. So yeah, that sort of made the grind on that one all worth it, and I really enjoyed it. But yeah, sometimes this year in particular, there's been a lot of like back-to-back product releases and stuff that have been pretty hardcore, but it's all good fun. Can't complain.
For a CPU with integrated graphics, do the values like 15 watt and such, so the TDP, does that include the GPU part of it? And if so, would the CPU be capable of higher performance as a CPU when disabling the integrated graphics? So the TDP generally just refers to the maximum power that any part of that can use. So the combined sort of, if you're using just the CPU, it can use up to 15 watts on the CPU. If you're using just the GPU, you can use up to 15 watts on just the GPU. I mean, technically, you will still have to use a little bit on the CPU.
15 watts of what? Explain the TDP in detail.
Well, let's not get into that, because that could be... We'll spend hours trying to break that down. But yeah, it is sort of like a mixed thing. So if you're in a mixed workload where you need CPU and GPU, it might allocate like 7 watts to the CPU, and then the remaining 8 watts will be on the GPU. Hopefully I've got my maths right there.
Yes, just.
So yeah, that's generally how it works. So even if you're using like a CPU limited app and the GPU wasn't being used at all, there wouldn't really be any advantage in disabling the integrated graphics, because all that TDP is going to the CPU anyway. So yeah, that's generally how I believe it works, and what we've seen from sort of the mobile parts and the APUs seems to be pretty similar on Intel parts as well. Yeah, and that can be kind of why you see GPU utilization change a bit depending on how CPU limited and CPU heavy the titles are when you have those TDP limits.
Can you predict, Tim, how Intel's 10th gen CPU would perform against 3rd gen Ryzen, especially if their CPU gets a core increase? So maybe core parity, let's say.
Well, I don't think it'll be core parity. The rumors suggest it will be 10 core.
Yep.
So if we go with 10 core, I mean, on gaming performance, one of the main reasons we saw from 8700K to 9900K, the performance increase, was the frequency also increased. Is that going to happen with 10th gen? We might get 5.1 gigahertz, but that's kind of...
a smidgen
Yeah, it's like much of a muchness. So was it a 5% increase?
Yeah,
less than that.
Yeah, less than that.
Yeah.
So the resulting performance would be less than that.
So if we're talking about gaming performance, I would expect the 10th gen parts to be very similar to 9th gen parts, maybe slightly better, but certainly because a lot of games don't use 8 cores, 10 cores, that's not going to be much of a difference.
Well, as just throwing a spanner into the works there, we saw with the Cascade Lake X parts that in a lot of, not necessarily games, though I'm not sure about that one, but in a lot of the productivity benchmarks, we saw that they were a little bit slower than the 9000, so that basically the Skylake X and Skylake X refresh parts, because of the security fixes made at the hardware level. So I wonder if that's going to happen here.
That's a potential angle that I wasn't thinking of at all. So that could potentially be an issue, and I imagine it could be.
Could be. So there could be a smidgen. So basically that would offset the clock speed increase, which is exactly what we saw with Cascade Lake X. So clocked a little bit higher, but it may actually end up being a little bit slower, or the same because of security fixes at the hardware level.
Yeah, I think the battle there will be interesting in terms of on the productivity side, because the 9900K is not too bad as far, like, it obviously gets beaten by the higher core count parts.
Yep.
But
depends what you're doing, though.
Yeah, it does depend what you're doing. It has a fairly substantial frequency advantage over Ryzen. So when you sort of add an extra 2 cores in there for productivity, multi-threaded stuff, it's hard to say. It depends how many cores they can get clocking at what level. Like, what's the all-core frequency they can get on 10 cores?
That'd be very interesting.
I would think a 10 core from 10th gen could be quite competitive with the 3900X. We've sort of seen a couple cores less on Intel can be as good as a Ryzen part with a couple more cores. So I think the 3950X will stay undefeated for productivity. I don't think 10th gen will be able to match that. But in the $500 class, a 10 core part could be reasonable.
If they can get it in there for that price.
Then... Of course, this is ignoring power consumption and heat, which will obviously be a big concern for these parts. I think it'll be... I don't think the 8-core parts will be particularly interesting, but the 10th core, who knows? Do you think AMD will go even lower with Navi, perhaps an even lower tier model of the 5500 to match performance of, say, a GT 1030? What about higher than 5700 XT? They already, at least on the mobile side, they already have like their 5300 series, which... can't quite remember how that stacks up, whether it was lower clocks or something like that.
Is it the same silicon with some disabled?
I believe it is the same silicon with lower clocks or something like that. So whether we see it on the desktop, I'm not sure, but usually around this mark is sort of the cutoff, like $150 mark is the cutoff before AMD takes their products into the OEM only category. So I think I'd be surprised if there were too many lower tier models.
It might be a non-XT model with a couple of SM units disabled.
Yeah, that's probably it though, down sort of RX 570 performance. But they've got the RX 570 as it is already.
Well, they've got the RX 580 and 590, so that didn't stop them.
As for higher than the 5700 XT, that'll definitely happen. It's just a matter of when. Is that Navi? Is that RDNA2? Who knows?
Don't hold your breath. Okay, well, I think we've pretty much already answered this one, but since it was upvoted, we'll just quickly address it. Question to both of you, what's your New Year's resolutions? Also, what are your plans for Harbour Unboxed in the upcoming year? Can we expect some substantial changes? Well, we've already talked about the Harbour Unboxed. No substantial changes, no new host or anything like that, just...
standard stuff,
Just the boring 2 hosts that you currently have. Well... at least one boring host anyway. Can't drag Tim into that. He's pretty special with his monitor reviews and stuff. But no changes there. Maybe upgraded studios and stuff like that. I'm really hoping that will be the case on my end at least. New Year's resolutions. Tim's is just like, I'm a simple man. I'll keep doing my monitor reviews. No need to change anything. It's a winning formula.
Yeah, it's pretty much. I'd like to go through and really improve some of the laptop testing stuff, to go through and just update everything, get that really nice and fresh for some of the stuff that's coming up. So I'm not sure whether that counts as just doing more work or a New Year's resolution. So not really sure which category that falls into. But yeah, on the channel side, not too much. Do you have any New Year's resolutions?
Nah, I don't really do those. Just they get in the way of my benchmarking.
You've got to finish your shed. Surely that's...
Well, that's... yeah. I'm building a shed so where I can store a lot of stuff, and I've been doing it for about a year now. But it's almost there.
Get on it.
And there'll be a shed BTS video for the Patreon members next week.
Yep.
So
nice.
that's my New Year's resolution. I'll make a BTS video.
Yep. Get it done the first week. New Year's resolution done.
Done.
Check that off. You're all good.
Back to benchmarking.
Which improvements do you think will AMD's RDNA2 architecture have? And in your opinion, which improvement should it have to be more competitive?
More frames, less cost.
Oh, yeah.
Problem solved.
When it comes to sort of figuring out what architecture changes they're going to make, we're not architecture designers, or we don't have our crystal ball, so we really don't know what sort of things they'll do. I think if you sort of look at a general perspective, like really generally, what do they need to do? I think they need to continue pushing their efficiency up. They're still on 7 nanometer doing about as good as Pascal on, what are they up to? Is it 12 nanometer on Turing? So they still seem to be a little bit behind there in terms of their efficiency compared to the node they're using. So I think they need to push up that a bit more.
Yep.
And another thing that I think obviously is going to be a big thing is the hardware accelerated ray tracing. So that seems like it's pretty much confirmed for RDNA2, considering the consoles will be using hardware accelerated ray tracing. So yeah, with those two things, they should be more competitive. But a lot of the time, as you say, it just comes down to performance and price as to whether a product's competitive or not.
Yep.
As opposed to...
They need to chuck a bit more money at driver development, so they're on top of that a bit more. I mean, I haven't seen the major problems that a lot of people have, apparently, with 5700 XTs.
Yeah, I haven't had problems either.
Yeah, mine's been pretty smooth sailing. I talked about once about having like a black screen issue with a display port, but that was pretty easy to work around. The original 2020 drivers, I said in one of my 5700 XT reviews, lots of problems. The updated one, the more recent one, no dramas. Again, like the Adrenaline 2019 final release. So I think they could definitely do with a bit more time and money spent on drivers, but it's not, at least from what I've seen, as bad as what a lot of people say. And it sounds like you've had a similar experience there.
Is AM4 dead in 2020?
Well, not officially that we know of. So
yeah, it seems unlikely.
AMD said they would continue support till at least 2020. That was the promise, wasn't it?
I believe so, yep.
So that doesn't mean they'll kill it in 2020. It means they'll get to 2020 and evaluate their options. And if they don't need to kill it for updated memory support, which doesn't look likely at this point in time, then yeah. So no, I don't think so. I think it will continue on for at least another generation.
Yep.
What is backporting? And how would this theoretically benefit Intel and AMD CPUs in the future when transitioning nodes?
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion that's come up since there was those slides about Intel theoretically backporting their architectures to an old node. So when an architecture is developed, it's always developed with a node in mind. So they get the specifications from their fabs and they work in tandem with that when developing the architecture. So there's a lot of features that are developed for the node specifically so that it can be used. So what backporting is essentially taking the design that's meant for a certain node and bringing it onto the previous generation node. So if we're using Intel as an example, that would be, for example, taking Sunny Cove on 10 nanometer and backporting that so that it is designed for 14 nanometer and can be manufactured there. So making whatever design changes are necessary to make that happen. The advantages that this gives is that it seems like with a lot of new nodes that are coming out that they're more targeted towards lower power. They can't clock necessarily as high as the previous generation, or they give very minor sort of clock speed gains. So theoretically with backporting, you could have all your new architecture advancements, say with Zen 2, the improvements to 256-bit floating point, for example. Let's take that as an example. And then you would bring that onto the previous gen node and 12 nanometer and allow you to either make, say, cheaper chips that would be easier to manufacture and you could have more value-oriented options, or they could be using that to achieve higher clock speeds if it's a process refinement like with Intel. So theoretically, 14 nanometer could clock a lot higher, so you'd produce the architecture for desktops on 14 nanometer and you'd leave the power efficient mobile stuff on 10 nanometer. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds and optimizing between the strengths and weaknesses of each node. And especially with Intel tending to do a lot of process optimization, which doesn't seem to happen as much on TSMC. There seems to be a lot of reason to split the sort of nodes there and do a bit of backporting so we get we get architecture advancements, we get high clock speeds, we get power efficiency depending on the market. I think it's actually a really good idea, and I think it could be quite successful. So yeah, I'm excited to see how that goes.
Do you think it's worth splurging on high-end RAM for Ryzen build? I've seen some kits that are more than double the cost of sort of same speed kits, so obviously lower latency memory costs more. I know it's the timings and all that, so I won't get any further into this because we've sort of answered this question a fair bit. Basically, manually tuning up your memory for Ryzen or whatever can have a fairly big impact on performance, as we recently saw in a video, or sometimes it doesn't make much difference at all. Depends whether your CPU limited, whether the memory timings and the higher latency was causing some sort of performance hit there. Generally, the answer is no. It's not worth buying premium memory. It just makes sense to buy, you know, a 3200 kit that's sort of CL16, say, or whatever makes sense in terms of price. You get the best memory you can before you sort of get to the point of diminishing returns where it costs, you know, significantly more to get a slight improvement in timings. But yeah, basically for productivity workloads, it makes next to no difference, and for games, it can, you know, vary. But unless you've got an RTX 2080 Ti and you're playing at 1080p, probably not going to notice. So I would just get the memory that makes sort of sense to buy in terms of cost per frame, I suppose. Tim. Oh, so this is another Tim one.
Nice.
How many modern games are compatible with ultra-wide monitors, and would you recommend for casual gamers seeking greater immersion given the extra response? So
extra expense.
Oh, expense. Sorry.
Because ultra-wide's more expensive by a fair bit.
Yep,
still.
I should have kept looking at my screen before I looked away then.
Yeah,
go for it.
I've been using ultra-wide for the very early days of ultra-wides. I've had my Predator X34 for, don't even know how many years now, at least 3 or 4 years.
Yep.
And in that time, many more games have become ultra-wide compatible. I think it's, back in the early days, it was kind of maybe 50% of games would support it reasonably well. The other 50% would be like terrible. Mm-hmm. These days, it's pretty rare to get a game that doesn't support it properly. And if they do, they're kind of janky ports.
Yeah.
I'd say at least take a game like The Outer Worlds, for example. That's a game that has sort of partial support. Like in the game, it works fine. Like you can just play the game. It's all good. But sometimes you'll get like letterboxing or pillar boxing on the side. Sometimes there'll be a few things that are stretched out incorrectly. Mm-hmm. Those are much more common problems these days than back in the old days where it just like wouldn't work at all or was just fully broken on 21.9. So I'd say these days, you know, there's 70% of games are like perfect support. Mm-hmm. Works flawlessly out of the box, which is really good. You probably have another 20% that are like mostly good but have a few issues, and then 10% are your games like Sekiro, games like Detroit Become Human that just don't support it at all and like either refuse to run at that resolution or force pillar boxing or whatever. So I think it's really worth doing if you want extra immersion. I love gaming on ultra wide, and I think the issues these days aren't too bad, so I'd jump in.
Okay.
And we got our final question for the Q&A part 1 and 2 at least.
Nice, quick, easy one.
The best and worst products of the decade. So let's think back in the past 10 years. And I think we have some pretty decent candidates here. I think there's some fairly obvious ones on the AMD side for both best and worst.
Oh, what are you talking about? So the best one would be the AMD... Oh, sorry, worst. It would be AMD FX, surely. No, that would be my vote, I think, just because I give it such a hard time and all the guys know that I do.
I think it genuinely is the worst CPU product we've had
CPU product.
2010.
Yeah. So I'm going to say AMD FX. And then would you say Ryzen has been the best?
It's hard because we've had Skylake in there as well, which is kind of like Ryzen has been good the past few years, but Skylake really dominated that sort of.
Well, Sandy Lake.
Sandy Bridge, yeah. Sandy Lake.
I'm getting too tired.
There's probably a reason why they didn't call it Sandy Lake, because that sounds like a pretty dodgy lake.
Sounds like somewhere where you go to die.
Yeah.
Well, actually, there's a joke in that, but we'll move on.
Sandy Bridge and Skylake were both really good. Like,
yeah, they were.
Skylake has had really good longevity. We can all laugh at all the 14nm plus, and it's kind of slowed down a bit now. But did Skylake come out in 2015? Was it around then?
Yeah, that sounds right.
And we've now 4 years, and they're still reasonably competitive with it. Like that's
it's pretty incredible.
So I think Ryzen is definitely the biggest comeback of the decade.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Certainly now, right at the end, we've got really good competitive products, really good pricing, very good value.
Yeah, well, I think there's no questioning AMD FX worst nominee, but the best.
Yeah, it's hard. I also had a few other nominations. I had for bad. KB Lake X was really bad. Yeah, that was a terrible, pointless product.
No one knew or care about KB Lake X. It was just something. It was basically more of a meme than it was a product.
Yeah, I think on the GPU side, undoubtedly Pascal is the best product of the decade.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I think that has been a really incredible architecture. That it was a major step forward. Had a really good run. Again, like to see those products having a good sort of life. And yeah, I think it's probably one of the best products there. Whether it's the best product of the decade up against like Ryzen or Skylake or something like that is questionable.
It was good though.
You put it to, but certainly it's been one of the best products.
You could argue till the end of time on what's the best or what's the worst or whatever.
I think that's a good range of products that you can put in there. Sort of the.
But I know I'm happy with those picks.
Yep.
Good job, Tim.
I'd say so. And that's it for part 2 of our monthly Q&A series for December. Thanks everyone for submitting your questions on the YouTube community tab. As always, we get a whole bunch of really great questions. Sorry to those people who we didn't have enough time to answer your questions. You can always try again next time. Always on the lookout for some cool questions. So
sign up to our Patreon Discord and you can ask it there.
Yeah, that's another good way to get into the Patreon Q&A, which will be coming up in the next couple of days, part 3 of the Q&A series. What else? Subscribe if you haven't. It'd be pretty weird watching these Q&As by some random strangers if you hadn't subscribed at this point.
It's probably pretty weird anyway. So.
Yeah, we are pretty strange characters. So subscribe for more fun stuff from the Hardware Unboxed crew. What else? We've got merch. Check that out. Links in the description.
Patreon, all that stuff. All the usual stuff.
Yep. I think that's it. Enjoy the rest of 2020 or 2019. Enjoy 2020 that's coming up.
We should make this in 2019, I think.
I think it's coming out. Okay, cool. Hopefully. All right, that's it. I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve, and we'll see you again next time.